Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's Wednesday, June 12th, 2024. Time for another show and time for more, I guess, on the developing story of how crazy the Alitos are. I guess. I don't know. Justice is hinting that there's something I might not yet have caught up on. And, hey, if you've got your latest Martha Ann Alito article handy, send it on along. I'm sure it may also be in Greg's Roundup. I don't even know anymore whether I'm up to speed on the latest lunacy or not. I have no idea, and it's very difficult to keep up because of just how crazy things are getting. In the meantime, other things to catch up on. I'm sure we'll talk to Greg about this. Hunter Biden, at last, his trial has come and gone. He's been found guilty, and it's been a very interesting 24 hours, not only just trying to unpack the fact that he's been found guilty of a thing of which he was guilty, but there's also the interesting angle of actually lots and lots and lots of people are potentially chargeable under the same offense, and just generally speaking, prosecutors tend to look the other way, although that's just luck of the draw. Bad news for you if you happen to be the relative of a prominent politician, because from time to time it pays to send the message that, well, you know, the thing we used to believe, that no one was above the law. Of course, generally speaking, what that ends up meaning, as it happens, given the conditions in the two parties, that the relatives of Democrats and, of course, the Democrats, sometimes the elected officials themselves, are willing to submit or end up submitting, even if they're not willing, like Menendez, to the rule of law, whereas Republicans simply say, well, that's just not for us. We don't do that thing, and we're not into it. And, all right, that's the outcome of it. But it has given rise to a very interesting new conspiracy theory that Greg Sargent outlines, although this morning I also see him saying it's so dumb, it's not even really, conspiracy theory might not even really be the word for it. It's just insanity. I guess the gist of it is that for the longest time, the MAGA Republicans have been saying, because, you know, everything is projection with them and every Republican accusation is a confession, they were pretty sure that since their guy would definitely pardon his own kids if they were charged with a crime, that Biden would do the same, or that he would find some way, if that was embarrassing to him, he would find some way of engineering things such that there could be no conviction of his son. And then, of course, there was the conviction of his son. So for the ordinary person, that means, all right, you know, yes, this might be something that an ordinary person might have escaped charging on, but this is a prominent person, and it would be noticeable if there were no charges brought on something that, you know, he was clearly guilty of. So they went ahead and prosecuted the charges to show that the system actually does work, and there is some reason to have faith in the American judicial system. So of course that causes MAGA to go haywire, because their whole theory has been, no, of course, Joe Biden is going to rig this trial such that his son is not found guilty. And then when his son was found guilty, it has now shifted to, well, this is a disguise. This is meant to show that the deep state is cloaking itself, and they convicted Joe Biden's son in order to make it look like things are fair and the justice system works under Joe Biden, when really it was rigging it to make it look like it was working, when clearly the option was there to make it not work the whole time. So this is where they are. And as Greg Sargent points out on social media this morning, I'm not certain that that is coherent enough to rise to the level of a conspiracy theory. Plus, of course, the idea that there's some sort of strings being pulled and everybody's brain is being controlled by one master manipulator. Probably not true either. All of these people have reached their break with reality more or less individually. I can't say it's entirely organically, but the idea that there's a central messaging machine programming their brains, not quite exactly right. There are, of course, many cogs and many wheels and gears in this machine that are affecting their brains. So central control of it, maybe not so much, although central focus, certainly, there is that. Okay, well, we'll catch up on all of that with Greg Dworkin when he joins us. It is also, of course, he will remind you Wednesday. I mean, I could remind you that it's Wednesday. It doesn't fall to him to do that. But when he shows up again, then you know it's Wednesday, and then you know that the previous day was Tuesday, and you know what Tuesdays are. Basically, from like January through July in this country, and in an election year, it's primary day. So lots of primary news to catch up on as well. Not my primary news. That is to say, I primarily was focusing on other stuff. But there's much to catch up on. There's interesting results to parse. In the end, not always a win necessarily, but results to parse nonetheless. And we'll see whether there's any other weird Alito news that I might have missed. I've been enjoying it. It's the coverage is expanding, and beyond the original factual reporting, and the analysis has been rather fascinating around the world. Okay, let's see other things in pocket that we have had either from this morning or didn't get to the other day. There's an awful lot. Here comes Greg with his lot, which will not be awful, I would predict. And let's just jump right straight into it, because it's time. I've already introduced the fact that it's Wednesday and that everybody knows what that means. Good morning, Greg. How are you?
Good morning. So everybody knows that Wednesday means that yesterday was primary day, and maybe there's a couple of things to talk about.
Except Tom Carvel. He did not acknowledge that, and he believed that it was Sunday.
Oh, well.
No, Wednesday was anyway, Sunday at Carvel. And then he died, and then I don't know what happened.
Then Fudgy the Whale stopped being advertised. That's what happened.
That's right. I see a conspiracy in this.
Yes, I see Fudgy the Whale everywhere.
I do too, actually, daily on social media. So many of our good friends actually, there's multiple people using Fudgy the Whale as their icon, their avatar. So
right. In any case,
yes,
I don't have much to talk about the Alitos. It's not that they're good people all of a sudden. They're not. They're terrible.
It's just
they're just as corrupt.
Just too terrible
it's
to talk
just
about.
That nothing's going to happen about it.
Yeah. And I mean, well, that's the analysis of it. And I somewhere I pocketed something where somebody writes that up, quite concisely. Yeah, it's he's acting as though he's acting as though with impunity, and that's because he has got that.
Yeah. Now the bad thing about Alito is that he and his brethren, are going to probably issue an opinion on Friday, an unusual day for the Supreme Court, which means that it's probably going to be a momentous decision and a really bad one. And I'm bracing for the contraception decision.
Oh, okay. All right. It could be any number of things. They're very late with a lot of
the only
decisions.
day this week they're supposed to announce is Thursday, but then they said there might be one on Friday.
Yeah. How about Saturday? Just do Saturday. Why not?
I could do Saturday.
Why not?
Anyway, so there's that.
They don't have to be there.
But as far as special elections go, there was one in Ohio 6, which was really unusual.
Ohio 6?
Ohio 6. There was a Republican who retired. Forget his name. I think Bill Johnson or something like that. Howard Johnson, Olson and Johnson. Some Johnson.
Yeah. Johnson and also Johnson.
Anyway, he retires and he becomes the president of Youngstown State University, YSU.
And renames it Johnson University.
So there's a opening.
All right.
Now, this is a district that when he was running, I don't even remember if that's his name. It's some generic, Republican name. But when he was running, he generally would win about like 75-25. It's a very rural, white, highly Republican district.
Okay.
When Donald Trump ran in 2020, I think he won by like 29 points.
Wow. Okay.
So with this special election, you'd expect the Republican to win. Mm-hmm. They did.
Oh, well.
But
what a surprise.
Michael Rowley, who's running, gets 54.7, and Michael Kripchak, the Democrat running, gets 45.3. So it's only like a 10-point win. That's an amazing overperformance when you consider Michael Rowley put $700,000 into the campaign, and Michael Kripchak, who's a waiter, that's his where he's coming from, puts in $25,000
as a tip.
A quarter of which was raised by Charles Gaba, brain rap on Daily Kos.
Really?
I mean, the guy had no money. And this was a district that was overwhelmingly Republican. And you can't make the case that, well, those highly college-educated voters always show up in special, well, that's not who lives there.
Yeah.
So it was a pretty amazing result that people are still trying to still trying to understand and explain. If I'm not mistaken, I think this also includes East Palestine, where the derailment took place. Okay. It could be throw the bums out kind of an election, whoever they are.
Yes.
Possible.
Sure. I mean, there's bums everywhere.
There are. But anyways, pretty amazing result. And we'll hear more about it as people start to actually ask people, why did you vote this way?
Yeah, if they answer. So I'd like to know. That's a district that should have been a 20, 30-point Republican win
turns out to be a 10-point win.
Yeah. I mean, look, that's good. That's good news. And I mean, it's not because everyone was saying, you know what we have always been saying? We got to have a waiter in Congress. I mean, It wasn't that. It was always the issues, I assume.
I mean, I've said that for years.
I mean,
we have too many lawyers. We need some waiters.
That's true. And by the way, all members of Congress say that as well. Not because they seek the pleasure and wisdom of serving with a waiter. They want somebody to bring them their bean soup.
Right.
So too bad. Anyway, we made a narrow miss, but good news for suddenly finding out that there are people who are willing to turn out for Democrats in places that no one ever thought that was the case. Good.
Well, I think what happened is the Republicans stayed home. So in
that's fine too.
Ohio District 6 in 2020,
but you still have to vote.
This was like a regular election style thing.
Yeah.
Bill Johnson, the winner, gets 74.4%, and he's got 249,000 people voting for him. The loser, Shauna Roberts, gets 25.6%, so it's basically 75-25, and she gets 85,000 people voting for her.
Okay. So what happened here?
And in this special election, only 59,600 people showed up altogether.
Oh, okay.
Shauna Roberts got more in losing in 2020 than the entire electorate in 2024 in this special. So it was a really low turnout special, and that's probably why it turned out the way it did.
Okay, so maybe not, see change in voting patterns, but also still a good lesson.
All the Democrats voted, every single one of them, and all the Republicans stayed home.
Yeah, the Republicans probably figured we got this in the bag, and Democrats said, well, we're probably going to lose, but I hate sitting here and not letting people know, hey, there's Democrats here, damn it.
So don't read too much into it, except that it keeps happening all the time.
There is that. And it also does take us back to special elections are a weird thing. That's why they call them special. And anything can happen in them, and you should never sit one out with money or votes. Okay, so because you never know what's going to happen. And what can I tell you? It was a special election, minimal turnout, hardly anybody showed up. We're going to knock this guy out. Yeah, well, for the next year or so, that guy's your congressman. Sorry.
So, Adventures in Accuracy. This is the actual headline on Daily Kos. Ohio 6 Democrat just overperformed by up to 20 points. Guess who raised 4% of his entire campaign budget? And that would be me, Brain Rap, who's writing the diary. So good for him.
All right, cool. Yeah,
Bill Botek also, a separate fundraiser on Daily Kos, raised some bucks for him. So, it was all good.
Yeah, and sometimes people think that, it's a lost cause. I can't afford to put my money there. And if you can afford a couple of bucks, we all do it together. And then you get a headline like this. I mean,
a couple of bucks would have been 50% of his budget.
Yeah, as it turns out. And I mean, it wasn't likely to work out as a Democratic win, but at least it's now worked out as hey, look at this. Things can be done in places in the country that you thought they couldn't happen. So
since we're talking about Ohio anyway, let me throw in this poll.
All right, Ohio.
This is from NPR Marist. Marist, a very good pollster. Trump 48, Biden 41, RFK Jr. 5. That's no surprise.
5 is all right.
Okay. And if of those definitely voting, Trump 49, 43, a 6-point win. But the thing is, Sherrod Brown, 50, and his likely opponent, Moreno, gets 45.
Yeah, right.
So Sherrod Brown is actually doing fairly well.
Well, he's been elected to Congress many times from Ohio.
Favorable, unfavorable. Sherrod Brown gets plus 14. Moreno gets minus 5. Trump gets minus 6. And Biden gets minus 21. I don't think that Biden's going to be winning Ohio.
Yeah, I guess not.
But hey, Sherrod Brown's doing great. So
yeah.
I thought I'd throw that in there.
And, Biden will not be reporting to prison or being arraigned anytime soon either. So right. I lost, but I'm not under arrest.
Yeah, it'll be interesting in the fall, So Biden narrowly loses Ohio, but wins Ohio 6.
That might be.
Not likely.
No, but Biden narrowly loses Ohio and Trump is in prison.
Yeah, that could be. So, the news that I sort of don't really want to spend a whole lot of time on, but I guess we should because it's in the news. I think it's a one-day story, and that is Hunter Biden is guilty. Guilty, you might say, because he's guilty on 3 charges.
Well, he was. So, there wasn't too much you could do about it.
Like,
he did his thing. All right.
Nobody cares. This is Harry Enton on CNN. The deal on Hunter Joe Biden in the public's mind is pretty clear. They think Hunter's troubles are unrelated to Joe, and Joe's being a good dad. The vast majority say no impact on their vote, and those who say they'd be less likely to vote for Joe are mostly GOP. They're already not voting for him.
Yeah.
Joe is a good dad by supporting his son. Is this believable or not believable?
What do you mean? I just saw it. It's believable.
This is from Ipsos. Believable 54, not believable 25. I mean, most people think Joe's hug of his son is like, that's it. I mean, that's the only news really coming out of the trial.
Yeah. Well,
now, I saw an interesting theory that said that Joe Biden's big kryptonite weakness is he loves his family.
Oh, yeah. We hate that. That's disgusting.
So talk about disgusting. This is a disgusting theory. No. So when Beau Biden died, it really hurt Joe Biden.
Yeah.
Loved his son. He saw him as a political future heir apparent to the political stuff. He saw him as a future president, possibly, all this stuff.
Yeah, I mean,
and in fact, he kind of withdrew from running for a while. So Jim Jordan and James Comer thought, well, if we go after, this is the theory, if we go after Hunter Biden, perhaps we can really upset Joe Biden and hurt him at a time that he's running for president, and that would be a good thing for us. So they've been overboard, Republicans in general, and those two in particular, have been overboard in trying to, quote, get, unquote, Hunter Biden.
Yeah. Because
it's a way to get to Joe. There's no other reason, because, nobody cares about anything else.
For the most part, yeah. I mean, that sounds like their sort of work, but
it sounds like their sort of work.
Yeah,
so, it's certainly
a totally
plausible.
Different situation, and remarkable that a human being reacted differently than a different human being was hoping they would react when they did.
Right. The thing is, it's not going to work, and the only thing it's reinforcing is that Joe Biden is basically a good guy.
Yeah,
and he's reliving a situation that many people, unfortunately, have found themselves in because either they have an addict in the family or somebody they know who's been in that situation.
Yes.
And, it's really not hurting him politically.
Nor
they don't care.
Anybody really
point,
think
right?
that they were going to.
That was part of the whole deal with Republicans.
Yeah. All right. Well, brilliant strategy that didn't work. And I don't know if we'll get to the stage where it backfires. But
let's see how it plays out.
I guess. I mean, it is a totally different situation. So it was a dumb bet, but dumb people made the bet. So it was likely that it was going to be dumb.
Right.
All right.
So there's that.
I think that's
this
enough,
is,
as you point out,
a piece on Media Matters. MAGA propagandists juggle conspiracy theories following Hunter Biden verdict. I gave you my conspiracy theory. It's the only one I like. Okay. But they really have to work on this because it came out that Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, is guilty.
Of this guy. Yeah.
So Charlie Kirk posts This is a fake trial trying to make the justice system appear balanced. Don't fall for it.
Yeah, you can't fool me with his actual conviction.
You're trying to make it look like this is a fair trial. We know better.
Yeah.
What does that even mean?
I don't know. If they had been, if the trial had come back not guilty, they would have said this is an outrage.
The true crimes of the Biden crime family remain untouched.
I see. Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, there's also that. Right.
Right.
Sure. Yeah, that's pretty weird. And Greg Sargent largely taking the same tack here, basically pointing out that, they just need a negative story. And, I mean, as if it wasn't enough that, well, he's convicted. That's a negative story. Well, no, but we mean super villain level negative
but this,
story.
this is one of those, if you're writing it beforehand, you write the two stories.
Right.
And the one story is, he got off. That shows it's rigged because they convicted Trump, but they let off Hunter Biden. Mm-hmm. And then he gets convicted, but you have the other story running, he was convicted. This shows the process is rigged.
Yes.
Because they convicted Donald Trump, and they also convicted Hunter Biden just to fool you.
That's supposed to make you think that the system is balanced and fair because both sides something. But yeah, well that way they only have to change the first paragraph.
I don't believe they're underestimating how stupid their voters are.
No, they may be quite correct.
They may be quite correct there, but of course, it's still only less than 40% of the population. You can always look at this and say, "Oh my God, it's 40% of the population," but there's always been 40% of the population that is knocked down bonkers in this country. Mm-hmm. At one point it was a majority, and that's how we got Jim Crow. But, hopefully it's going to be less than that. So we'll see about that in the fall.
All right. Yes. Remember, you'll have to wait and see.
You'll have to wait and see. That's our
byline, right?
This is from Slate, Dahlia Withwick, and Norm Ornstein writing. The biggest lie Trump-Biden 2024 rematch voters are telling themselves.
I like this. Is that the lie?
The biggest lie that voters are telling themselves, regular normie voters, is that somehow
I'm losing weight.
The system will hold.
Oh, okay. Yeah, guardrails, right. What have you.
He's openly said he'd be a dictator on day one, re-implementing a Muslim ban, purging the bureaucracy of professional civil servants. He'd begin immediately to put the 12 million undocumented people into detention camps before deporting them. His Republican Convention Policy Director, Russell Vought, has laid out many of these plans, as has Stephen Miller, Steve Bannon, Michael Flynn. They'd ignore the 22nd Amendment and stay beyond his term of office. This is all there. It's in Project 2025. In general, the mainstream media has shrugged at these overt plans and troubling actions, and most voters either have not focused on them or have dismissed them as exaggerations or impossibilities. After all, our constitutional system has endured for almost 250 years. We've just seen a historic moment in the rule of law. A unanimous jury of his peers found Trump guilty on 34 felony counts. Mm-hmm. If Hunter Biden was guilty, Trump is guilty.
Yeah, you can't even keep track.
This is huge news for about 3 days. For a good 2 days, however, proponents of democracy and justice system took the airways with a vanilla yogurt mayonnaise message. The criminal justice system works. The system held. Nobody's beyond, but no.
Yeah, I mean,
the conviction was a huge win, but Americans have a normalcy bias. It leads them to believe anybody who tells them everything's awesome and that a system is holding, they're going to believe it.
All right.
And lawyers especially. They have a terrifyingly normalcy bias. Yes. It leads them to assume so long as they're winning good cases, it means the justice system works. But that's one of the reasons why you don't want lawyers being the political analysts.
I guess. Yeah, and thinking about the nature of this charge, too, it's interesting to hold that up against the earlier punditry saying this is the small potatoes charge, this isn't the case you want to see go first, et cetera, et cetera. But it was the most likely to result in
the only case.
Normal
you got to do what you got to do.
Well, that's
you do what
you
can with what you got, as we used to say in Brooklyn.
Even had the option of trying the other cases first, it's hard to come out of that guilty or not, it's hard to make a normal situation out of trying the ex-president under the Espionage Act of stealing nuclear secrets on his way out of the White House.
Right. And they point out, the problem with this, of course, is that Republicans are openly campaigning against judges, juries, prosecutors, blowing up checks and balances, following Vladimir Putin and Viktor Orban's playbooks.
Yeah.
And they're treated with shrugs by mainstream journalists and commentators because, the system held. And therefore the voters believe it.
I guess, it just might be too short-term of a view.
There was one example, a recent example, and that was in, I think Will Bunch pointed out. It was in the Washington Post.
Wow.
Election 2024, the headline was Trump ally maps out a muscular Oval Office. Ex-budget director touts a post-constitutional agenda for second term.
Right, post-constitutional.
This is Russ Vought, right?
Yeah.
And instead of saying
now.
fascist, they said muscular.
Yeah. Like Rambo the fascist.
Right. Will Bunch retweeted this and said, what the average person can't fathom is, A, the news editors who write headlines aren't thinking about the fate of democracy. They're thinking about which words fit the assigned layout, what can fit in the column.
Yeah.
And B, their life is much easier if they don't make waves.
Yes, and alliteration.
So as a result, you get journalistic atrocities like this one. Trump ally maps out a muscular Oval Office. That's what Litwick and Ornstein are talking about.
Okay. Well, good for them. That's a good thing to point out. It is disappointing, and it does a disservice to democracy. But that too is alliterative. So it would work as a headline, but it might not be necessarily descriptive of what's going on. All right. Well, yeah, normalcy, there's that bias. And then, of course, the headline bias of not necessarily telling you what the hell's going on. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support.
Map reporting to show crime in Minneapolis out of control.
All right. Well, welcome back, everybody, to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio, where thankfully not where the crime is out of control. Where was that? Who was
GOP-endorsed Minnesota Senate candidate tweeted out a map purporting to show crime in Minneapolis out of control.
It is. It's out of control. Is it
Actually,
out of control?
what it was a map of drinking fountains in the city.
Oh, that too also out of control. I don't know.
People are drinking all over Minneapolis
in
it's
public.
Terrible. So they used to say in Alaska, this is a drinking village with a fishing problem.
Well, that long-time theme on the show, Republicans always campaign on the theme that America is a hellhole and getting worse, and that they'll help it get worse somehow, or, well, better, but also worse at the same time.
Christopher Ingham goes on to report, he's since updated it to a different unlabeled map, but the original is visible in the edit history. And in the replies, he's calling people cooks for mocking him about it. Oh. This is the man the Minnesota Republican Party has endorsed to represent the state in the U.S. Senate.
Awesome. He should fit right in.
Royce White. Take the loss, man. You're going nowhere. And Royce White says, shut your mouth, you blue wave cook.
Cook?
C-U-C-K.
Oh, yeah. All right. I don't know how they. Actually, I never. It's not something I say out loud very often. But yeah, that's it. That they love that terminology. That's supposed to be a weighted word for them. And whatever. Okay. So is it just he just took a map that looked like something was happening frequently in Minneapolis and said, "Well, it must be crime."
Yeah. Exactly.
All right. It's not people. This is a map of people being Minnesota nice.
Yeah. Crime in Minneapolis, out of control.
It's out of control. It's burned to the ground. Antifa, we know the story. Okay. It's not even there. I don't know why they're campaigning in it. I can't represent this. There's no population. They all left after Antifa destroyed it. That's a theory. How come they didn't get reapportioned?
Unclear.
Yeah. Okay. Well, never mind. Logic.
So, Jennifer Rubin has an interesting story about the double haters misnomer, Biden's secret weapon.
Okay.
All these voters are telling us is that they don't have a favorable view of either Biden or Trump. Hate exaggerates the effect and double falsely assumes they're unfavorable toward the candidates in equal measure. It's one of those both sides things.
Yes.
Perpetuating the misunderstanding of who these voters are and what they think meshes with cynical and hyperventilating punditry that would have us believe both sides are rotten and voters hate both equally. But, for example, when ABC Ipsos reported this month that 65% of Americans who view Trump and Biden unfavorably think the verdict this week was correct, with 2/3 believing Trump should end his presidential campaign, that's 67%. Can we really call these voters double haters?
Yeah, I see what you mean. There's intensity.
Kudos to the pollsters who correctly stated the category doesn't measure hate. It simply measures the sentiment of being unfavorably disposed.
Yes.
So it's become de rigueur to express contempt for both candidates.
Pardon your French.
Especially those who use highfalutin French terms like
de rigueur.
David Gregory.
Yeah, all right. I mean, maybe it's a measure. They need to measure the enthusiasm behind your hatred.
Exactly. Trump is a convict, an insurrectionist, a would-be authoritarian, but Biden's old. When 2/3 of them say Trump should leave the race, the intensity of their dislike for the two candidates obviously is not equal.
Yeah.
Never Trump focus group guru Sarah Longwell, I quote her all the time, has helped clarify the group in question. The chunk of voters who are dissatisfied with both candidates are trying to decide which one is less bad. Writing for The Atlantic, she said, although many of them are out on Trump, they're struggling to get their own Biden. In other words, they hate Trump. They don't like Biden very much. Once we understand we have no evidence that double haters actually hate Trump and Biden equally, conclusions follow. First, we can conclude that the electorate isn't morally obtuse. Too many news outlets concoct negative stories about Biden, no matter how poorly sourced, to counteract hugely negative facts about Trump, like he's convicted on 34 counts.
Yes.
These voters still may be receptive, as the ABC Ipsos poll showed, to reminders that Trump's character, temperament, and mental acuity should exclude him from serious consideration for the presidency. And by the way, what's really interesting to me, without evidence at all, other than Kevin McCarthy and Mike Johnson lying, there's no evidence that Biden has cognitive decline. It's absurd. And people like Nate Silver and others just keep repeating it. It's like everybody knows that there's at least some degree of decline. Why?
I don't know why.
Everybody
because they know old people have that.
Yeah. Why do you keep saying it?
That's just one of those things that I guess it works because, well, how do you know he's in cognitive decline? I don't see it. Well, he's 81. Well, all right. I mean, many people who reach their 80s have some decline. Did he? I don't know.
I'm latching on to this because I want to point out that I am a middle-of-the-road, median, both sides kind of commentator. So don't take me for a partisan.
Yeah.
Just because Trump's a crook and Biden's not.
I mean, you or who are we reading?
Whoever these.
Oh, okay. I see. Oh, yeah.
They're saying that we have to bring up Biden's decline because how could you not?
Right. And how would you trust me if I didn't?
It's not there. It's a lie.
But I'm lying to be trusted. Don't you see?
Exactly. I'm lying to be trusted. Now, what's wrong with this model?
Lying to be trusted.
Why aren't I as prominent as I feel I should be? I'm lying to be trusted.
Yeah. Doesn't that? Why are people not happier with me doing this? Okay.
And second, as Sarah Longwell points out, writes Jennifer Rubin, Biden's refrain of "Don't compare me to the Almighty, compare me to the alternative" is a perfect approach to these people. Such voters likely will not be talked out of concerns about Biden's age or food prices, but they may well come around to the conclusion, whatever Biden's faults, Trump is worse. Third, Biden and Vice President Harris has increased the tension on Trump's threat to the rule of law and democracy serves not only to solidify Democratic support, but to reach this hate Trump ambivalent on Biden group. While Biden didn't mention Trump in his Normandy commemorations, of course, the Republicans assumed he did.
They think he did, yeah.
Great Eric Harris is saying, I can't believe Biden is attacking Trump in Normandy. What did he say?
Fighting
he said
fascism.
He's against Nazis.
Yeah, that's where we fought Nazis. That's what gets said there.
Well, how could he attack Trump? If you think saying that you're against Nazis is attacking Trump, that says a lot more about you and Trump than it does about Biden.
Yeah, I mean, you're the one that thinks that the Hitler talk was Trump talk.
While Biden didn't mention Trump in his Normandy commemorations, the obvious parallels between the threat from authoritarians in 1940 and the authoritarian running in 2024 were hard to miss. And, of course, they infuriated MAGA apologists, and she gives references. Mm-hmm. And meanwhile, Harris, that's VP Harris to you.
Oh, yeah, thank
was
you.
Blasting Trump in Michigan. Simply put, Trump thinks he's above the law. This should be disqualifying for anybody who wants to be president of the United States.
Abby, stop mowing the lawn, please.
Here.
That's fine. She's a World War II historian, so she wants to weigh in on this.
She doesn't like, redoing history. 67% of those cited in the ABC Ipsos poll agree that
they should mow the lawn right now.
Above the lawn, that should be disqualifying.
Above the lawn? Is that what you said?
Whatever we disagree on, love of democracy, appreciation of alliances, respect for all, solidarity with fellow Americans, and opposition to tyranny are much more important. And finally,
yes,
a group of voters who are not favorably inclined toward either candidate may overlap with a section of the disengaged voter who's not turned into the race. Biden's hammering on the unacceptability of Trump may influence these voters just when they start to pay attention.
Well, yes.
In short, when Trump is reeling from the felony conviction and Biden is hammering home messages about democracy from Normandy, the incorrectly described double-hater voters are about to get a reminder. Biden isn't their perfect choice, but the other guy is unacceptable.
Yes.
It's yet another example of why polling from months or even weeks ago is irrelevant, because stuff happens, and the Biden-Harris team knows all too well that if the race is about Trump, Trump loses.
Okay. I think that's probably fair. What kind of information do we have about whether the double haters are capable of becoming triple haters?
You mean they hate Kennedy too?
Yes.
Everybody hates Kennedy.
I would think so, and so my guess is that that's a good reminder. You get into the ballot, into your voting booth if you still have those wherever you are, and I don't like any of these three people, but you're there, so you're not going to just crumple up the ballot and go home, right? What are you going to do?
There are occasions where people don't vote for the top of the ticket.
That's true. Undervotes. And it causes problems. If you're using Chads, forget about it.
Yeah. At the Bulwark, A.B. Stoddard, a lean conservative commentator, writes, new polls show potential for a sane majority.
Oh.
Unlike Dahlia Withlick and Norm Ornstein, she makes the case that maybe the center can hold.
Well, this is where are we reading again? Bulwark?
Yeah, the Republican rejection of the rule of law may be disqualifying. We were just talking about 2/3 of the voters say it's disqualifying. Yes, but polls say, well, this is a poll. That's what this poll says.
Yeah.
Yes, but, well,
I mean,
minus 6?
I guess. What else would you really expect? The Bulwark, I mean, isn't that a reference to the center that will hold?
Yeah. The Republican rejection of the rule of law may be disqualifying, and then there's the increasing GOP creepiness.
Oh, yes.
So she talks about a lot of that. It appears voters may have reached a breaking point with Trump. Multiple polls conducted since Trump's guilty verdict show that more voters think jury issued a correct verdict than not. Mm-hmm. Majorities and pluralities in the survey show voters believe Trump committed a crime, intentionally did something wrong, was not treated more harshly than other defendants by the justice system. These are basic points. This is what the public thinks.
Okay.
So
they're smart.
The noise from the Republicans isn't going to hide that.
No. Even if the noise is a lawnmower, it will not hide it.
Right. A hefty majority, but the mute button will. A hefty majority of respondents in a new Yahoo YouGov poll, 64%, said it's now important, that voters get a verdict in Trump's trials before the 2024 general election. And this is the only one we're going to get. It's the one.
Yeah.
He's guilty, guilty, guilty 34 times.
Yeah. What was the number on the percentage that thinks it's important that we get it?
64%.
Yeah. All right. I mean,
nearly 2/3.
Presumably, I guess the question could have been clarified. Do they mean, will this satisfy them, or do they mean, I meant the other trials? Those are a little more important.
Voters get a verdict in Trump's trials before the 2024 general election, end quote.
Yeah, I think they
want to know.
Probably want more
they
different
take
trials.
Stuff seriously.
They know how many times he's supposed to have been tried already.
You know that reliance, overindulgence, and the whole idea that no one's above the law and that we're a country of laws and the rule of law matters and all that stuff.
Duh.
What really is impressive, even if it's just hanging on by a thread, is normal, ordinary citizens in a jury, when given the evidence, deciding cases in a reasonable manner. That happened both with Hunter Biden and with Donald Trump, and the juries were impressive.
Yeah, and it's a longstanding pet peeve of Republicans that the juries of citizens are doing a good job with things.
Yeah.
They hate that. And this was actually something I pointed out, to take you back in the Wayback Machine to like the 1990s and forward from there, that the big Republican theme, national campaign issue of tort reform. We're going to have tort reform because these juries are out of control. They're giving away all our money to people that were injuring and maiming. I can't believe it. And they wanted to put a cap on these things and put a cap on damages.
If you pour super hot coffee on yourself at McDonald's,
it's your fault.
It's your fault.
Right. It's nobody's fault for giving you magma
Why
in a
weren't you
cup.
wearing asbestos shirts?
Right. And this has been the theme for a long time, that juries, that ordinary citizens to whom we present the facts and say, decide fairly, we're deciding fairly. And as Republicans, we need to put a stop to this.
Other things that she points out in the polls: the number of Americans who think Trump, quote, conspired to overturn the results of a presidential election, end quote, has increased 5 points since January. The number who believe him guilty of removing classified documents in the White House and obstructing efforts to retrieve them has risen by 4 points in the same period.
It's in front
Several
of you.
post-verdict surveys show Biden making gains.
All right.
Yahoo News YouGov poll show Biden leading Trump nationally for the first time. She's making the case
all right.
that it may be a small difference, but the evidence has emerged so far shows a segment of persuadable, non-tribal voters that believes a criminal conviction speaks to a person's fitness for the highest office, and their votes could be decisive. So, you have to contrast that with one of the more amazing things, which right after it happened, we who are used to the mighty Wurlitzers, it used to be called, just completely ignored. I mean, we noted it. We didn't ignore it in that sense.
No.
But didn't take seriously.
Okay.
Took literally, but not seriously. Was immediately after Trump's verdict, oh, you just elected Donald Trump. America will react with outrage, like the manufactured outrage we're manufacturing right now in Congress. And that's not at all how America looked at this. They saw the trial as fair, as deserving. Trump is a crook. It does show character. Nothing to see here.
All right.
And so the Republican response, over the top as usual, simply didn't affect the public the way they think it does. It was good for their fundraising.
Yes, that's always the case.
But that's all.
All right.
And as we see in Ohio 6, fundraising isn't everything.
That's true. Well, good. I mean, I'm glad it's sinking in. I guess it's an argument for normalcy. It's like, well, normally these things take a little bit of time to seep in, but people are going to react to them for the most part the way normal people do, not the way Republican fundraisers wish they would. All right. That takes a while to manifest itself. Okay.
Meanwhile, there's other things going on besides trials.
Oh? What else is there?
This is Navigator Research with a new survey out, a new poll. Most Americans could not support an elected official who supports banning abortion in vitro fertilization or contraception. Mm-hmm. That's important.
Ooh, see, I agree.
Abby agrees. I'm expecting a bad decision on Friday.
Yeah, right. So's Abby. I can hear that. That's all right. Most people would not elect such a group of politicians, but you might be stuck with one anyway.
Right. Large majorities of independents say they couldn't support an elected official. 72% who support banning contraception.
Okay, we'll get used to it.
64%, abortion 61%. As majorities of Republicans say the same on contraception, 68%, and IVF 56%. So Republicans, can live with a nationwide abortion ban.
Yes, they've gotten themselves acclimated to that. I mean, the rest of America.
Only 33% of Republicans. That's still a hefty.
Yeah. It's a way
would
to lose
oppose
elections.
Somebody voting for a nationwide abortion ban, but they really don't want to see contraception banned, and they don't want to see IVF banned.
Yeah. The IVF thing has been a weird Achilles heel for them.
And they're going all in on it.
Yeah, and saying that they're not.
It's not helping Trump to try to say both sides. Say, well, we'll just leave it to the states. Everybody love me. Let's change the subject. That's not working.
Right. A lot of people are worried about it. It's and people who had even those who had signed on for the anti-abortion agenda. Well, we're pro-family. That's why we're anti-abortion, and IVF helps create families. Yes, but technically something. And I don't think anybody's going to want to A, oppose it. B, I think they resent being told, "Oh, you're a secret abortion supporter because you love IVF." What? How did that? I see that. I see why they come to that conclusion, but people wanted to live with their internal contradictions. Why aren't you letting them do it?
So this is interesting. They asked one of those word things. We asked respondents to rank words or phrases that best describe an elected official who's opposed to these protections.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Okay.
Yes.
And they happen to list various categories. Democrats, percentage of Democrats listed people opposed to these contraception, IVF, abortion.
Yeah, they described.
How would you describe them? They listed Democrats, how they feel about it, independents, Republicans, 18 to 34-year-olds, and double haters.
Mm-hmm. And Wordle players. They would only give 5-letter words to the politicians.
The top choice best describe people who are opposed to these things, discriminatory and bigoted. Democrats, 53% of Democrats feel anybody who's opposed to these things is discriminatory and bigoted. 41% of double haters. 41% of 18 to 34-year-olds. 40% of independents. Only 25% of Republicans.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Still 25%.
Right? Now, the other terms that were most commonly used, old and outdated, conservative, going backwards, religious, dangerous, extreme, right-wing, traditional, MAGA, regressive.
Yes.
Not complimentary terms. Anything.
No. Right. And
although you can, you could say religious, conservative, and traditional are neutral.
I see. Possibly. And
you could love MAGA if you're MAGA.
Right. That's true. That could be a positive.
However, only 15% of Republicans describe people who were opposed to these things as MAGA.
Only 15% of Republicans. Okay.
So this is not necessarily associated with MAGA. It's interesting in terms of how people try to process what's going on here. Of course, it's all MAGA, but, Republicans look at it favorably.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's well, I don't know. Anytime you're trying to actually explain what people are doing, thinking, believing, I guess you run into these things that are like, well, but this doesn't make any sense. I know. It's just that's the way people feel regardless. Okay. Yeah. Well, it's unusual. Unpacking politics is going to be difficult and weird. Yeah,
it can be. People process things differently. Again, There's the people, they didn't ask, but given the news that Donald Trump was very bad at covering up a bribe to Stormy Daniels, how do you feel about him? Nobody asked that question. I mean, I know one
really,
undecided voter who thought that was the prime reason for deciding to vote for Biden, because Trump couldn't really do it.
Right, that guy.
They didn't survey that. They didn't ask other people.
Well, that was a focus group, and I don't know. Yeah, I guess maybe they were surprised to even hear that being said out loud. Somebody, certainly, other pollsters have read that story. That was the reason for that story, was to plant the idea that they ought to be asking that question, I think.
Yeah, and like nobody asked.
Interesting. Yeah, right.
The other thing that they didn't ask, what they should have.
Well, that is a weird story.
Is whether or not you remember who Joe the Plumber was.
Oh, right. Some of but that seems like they certainly treated that as though it wasn't the flash in the pan, didn't they?
Right.
And and then he flashed right into the pan and was gone, or out of the pan and into the fire. Well, that is I remember what you were talking about. I would think that'd be a difficult result to reproduce in the wild in great numbers. I'm against Trump because of his ineffectiveness at covering up his crimes.
Yeah.
But
I want somebody competent. If I want a crime family running the country, I want them to be good at what they do.
Yeah, I mean, weirdly, that does get said. And then, of course, what's odd about that, and now I'm reminded that the national media made a real run at saying, oh, so you want somebody who's competent and is capable of pulling the right levers to cover up, let's say, the fascist takeover of the United States. You want Ron DeSantis. And sorry, what? Oh, yeah, you want somebody who knows how government works and can run it. Right. Ron DeSantis. No.
So we have some inflation news from today, breaking.
Okay.
Inflation cool down.
This just in.
Food, 2.1% in the past year, up. That's the smallest rise since 2020. Restaurants, +4 in the past year, 4%. Smallest since 2021. Core inflation, 3.4%. Smallest since 2021. Commodities, 1.7%. Smallest since 2004. New vehicles, 0.8%. Smallest since 2018.
I mean, okay.
Pet food, 1.1%. Smallest since 2020.
Abby, what do you think?
Yeah,
now she's not.
Abby insisted that be included on the survey.
What about pet food? Yeah, and so right, and then if you have enough pet food around, then she's busy eating it rather than barking.
Right. So when Biden says the economy's okay, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. It's interesting that Brian Beutler makes a case that Biden should improve perceptions of the economy. He could. It's difficult.
I mean,
but
let's do it.
His sense of what happened is Donald Trump left office in disgrace, widely viewed as a failure. Joe Biden wanted to turn the page, his theory goes, and so he stopped talking about Trump, and that was a big mistake. And then the public started to remember Trump fondly because Biden wasn't talking about it.
I don't know if I remember it.
Viewed in a certain light, the inflation of 2022 is understandable as part of the cleanup Joe Biden did on Trump. And what Biden didn't do is aggressively blame Trump for it.
Okay.
Because Brian Beutler's basic premise here is that both credit and blame are something that you choose to claim.
Okay.
You claim that it's Trump's fault. Trump's very good at blaming everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, that's his default position, sure.
And he takes credit. And Biden just doesn't do that.
Oh, gosh, does he? Yeah, all right. I mean, certainly not to the extent that Trump does it, but he's abnormal at it. And to an extent, I mean, the settling in after the election was about, we're returning to normal times here, folks. And one of the things that normal presidents don't do is glom on to credit that way.
Right. And so Beutler thinks that Biden's just not aggressive enough. He can't just say Bidenomics is working. That's sort of a whistle-stop tour that lacks the courage of its convictions, waiting for Americans to wake up to the Biden boom. Mm-hmm. So there are a bunch of ways to conceive the persuasion challenge, and in Brian Beutler's head, this is how he breaks it down. For all the garments rent over how poorly the Biden economy polls, a large minority of voters do, in fact, believe correctly the economy's good. Biden doesn't have to worry about them. Among those who tell pollsters they believe the economy is weak, most will actually prospering economically. They'll be making more money than ever before, and the rest will have experienced a little change. So they make their opinion out of raw partisanship, the Republicans. So you can ignore them.
Yeah.
Some of those are Democratic-leaning voters, and they break down into two groups. Okay, the ones who are doing well and the ones who don't, and you just approach them differently. For the ones who are doing well, you bring out the people in their own communities who are doing well, and you highlight them. And for those who are not doing well, you're compassionate about it. So this is something that's retail politics. It doesn't necessarily work nationwide because you can't bring somebody from the community to a nationwide discussion. It doesn't work that way. Okay. If you're in East Palestine, you could do it. Mm-hmm. And you bring somebody in East Palestine who's doing really well, and you say to them, you got to think about, don't worry about what's going on nationally. Look what's going on right here, and I'm doing great. And why is that? Because the Biden economy, that sort of thing. So the Trump administration was every bit the disaster Biden's has been a triumph, but Biden can't expect people to conclude that on their own if he won't make the case himself. And again, this is the season, May, June, July, before the conventions, before the September launch of the campaign, which is when you put all your heavy advertising because people tune out over the summer because they want to enjoy the weather.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And so this is when the pundits have all this advice for how Joe Biden isn't doing what they want him to do, when the campaigns always push back and say, it's too frickin' early. Mm-hmm. It's too frickin' early to pay that much attention to the polls. It's a generic idea that's going on there. If you want to look at the polls at all, then you should look at the idea that Trump is not popular and people understand he did something wrong. It's the only part of the polling you should really pay attention to. We'll do our campaign in the fall like we always do our campaign in the fall. Even George W. Bush told people to chill. We'll do it in the fall. This is how it works.
Well, if you know that, then you can say, I demand X, and then X will show up. And then you
and say, see,
you know what you're doing. Okay, so an annual ritual. We've seen this before.
Well, it's a quadrennial ritual.
Oh. All right. See you, Greg. That's Greg's exit, everybody, and welcome now back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. He was on to let me know that word had reached him that Jerry West had died, NBA legend, and quite true. And NBA legends, it's been a rough patch for the NBA legends, I guess. All right, so we'll bring you that breaking news. I have no story available to cover that. I'm sure I could go and look for it, but it's not the NBA show. It's something else entirely. Okay, and we're at the period of the show where the blue sky deck malfunctions and takes everything else with it. So I can't tell whether there are people talking about the issue or not. And I'm a little hesitant to try and reload it because that may also bring us problems with the with Pocket and loading stories from Pocket. But we'll see whether any of the anticipated problems manifest themselves. All right. So what's up back in Pocket? I mentioned to you that we might be able to sample from the stream of media coverage over how to digest the Alito stories, even if it doesn't bring us the latest information on just exactly how bad and in what ways they're being terrible today as a couple. But both Sam Alito and Martha Ann Alito taped recently saying wildly inappropriate and unpopular things about their fellow Americans. And among them, I guess, this story, one of the digestions of that story from Eric Lutz, is that right, at Vanity Fair. Now we got to deal with the slow loading situation on that one, but we'll double check the authorship on that one. But I think that one actually comes out right Vanity Fair. However, I've got to read it from the pocket version. Sam Alito clearly thinks he's untouchable. And I think that's about right. And I think this looks like a fairly short way of putting it, too. It seems that Samuel Alito is precisely who Democrats say he is. So they're right. Not both sides, but rather the Democrats are right about this one. A partisan with little apparent concern for the legitimacy of the court on which he serves. The Supreme Court justice has tried to hide behind a thin veil of judicial independence, shrugging off the evidence of his ideological allegiance with some half-assed excuses. But the surreptitious recordings of him and flag enthusiast wife, Martha Ann Alito, discussing his zero-sum politics undermines all his sorry justifications and confirms the warnings Democrats and judicial watchdogs have been issuing throughout this court's credibility crisis. By the way, note that pairing. Who's been issuing those warnings? Democrats, which Republicans and occasional show horse independents will say means we can't take it seriously. Well, of course they're saying it. They're Democrats. They're partisan. Well, it's also being said by nonpartisan judicial watchdogs. Oh, well, that must just mean that the judicial watchdogs are also partisan. Really? Or couldn't possibly be that judicial watchdogs are saying it from a nonpartisan perspective? And it just so happens that Democrats who are saying the same thing aren't necessarily saying it from out of partisan consideration, but rather nonpartisan concern with the direction of the courts in this country. They should be rendering their decisions in nonpartisan fashion. The nonpartisan watchdogs are saying that they're not doing that to the dissatisfaction of Democrats who would prefer that they do that. Just sort of reminds me of the I don't know, takes me back to the situation of discussing the necessity of initiating impeachment proceedings against George W. Bush for various infractions against the domestic surveillance situation, the indefinite detention, things that were blatant violations of constitutional restrictions. And so therefore, you would initiate impeachment proceedings to see whether that was something you really wanted to expunge from the American government. But in order to do that, of course, it had to be done in Congress. Congress is filled with partisans, and so therefore the people who are saying, well, for the sake of the Constitution, perhaps we ought to be considering removing this guy from office. Well, you're doing it as a partisan. It's partisan. It's clearly Democratic partisanship to be calling for the impeachment of a Republican president. Well, what if you're calling for the impeachment of a president who, happens to be Republican, but is his core policy, his core foreign policy, and now domestic policy with the surveillance situation is a blatant disregard for the strictures of the Constitution? Isn't that a bad thing? Don't you want to get rid of that? Yes, but because he's a Republican, you're wanting to get rid of him means the reason you're doing it is because you're a Democrat. Okay, no, not really. But anyway, I see similarities in the situation here. You want to get rid of Alito because you're a Democrat. Well, remember that he's occupying an ostensibly nonpartisan position. Yes, he was nominated by a Republican president, but remember when the mantra used to be, that doesn't matter. It shouldn't matter who nominated him. Now, of course, I guess in a sop, you probably thought a sop to activists. Well, we'll note who nominated them, and that will help us straighten things out and see things in, more partisan terms, which is the terms you're not supposed to be seeing this in. For some reason, the media thought that was curative in some way. Anyway, let me get back to these more organized thoughts. The surreptitious recordings of Alito and his flag enthusiast wife discussing his zero-sum politics undermines all his sorry justifications and confirms the warnings that Democrats and coincidentally judicial watchdogs have been issuing throughout this court's credibility crisis. The recordings are a testament to the arrogance of Justice Alito and his wife, Congressman Hank Johnson, lead sponsor of the Supreme Court Ethics, Recusal, and Transparency Act in the House, told me on Tuesday. Supreme Court Ethics and Transparency Act. I wonder what they decide. Is there an acronym for that? It would be, if you use all the letters, SCERTA, SCERTA. I don't know whether they include the C from that or just say CERTA, or maybe they don't use any acronym at all. I'm just wondering whether they were trying to spell something. They are extremists, Johnson continued. These disclosures have shown a real need for the recusal apparatus to be more than just the justices deciding for themselves whether or not to recuse, which makes it all the more maddening that ethics reform has remained elusive and likely will, unless the Senate math changes. Judiciary Committee Chair Dick Durbin, the number 2 Democrat in the upper chamber, has repeatedly called for stronger ethics rules at the Supreme Court and for Alito and Clarence Thomas to recuse themselves from cases related to the January 6th insurrection. But after an ethics hearing last year was met with opposition, and after once again being snubbed by Chief Justice Roberts recently, Durbin has cast doubt on issuing subpoenas or taking other more aggressive measures, citing his party's thin majority. You need 60 votes, the senator told the New York Times, last week, period. Except not really actually, period, if you can get 50 together. But if he's saying you can't, then, I don't know whether they've actually polled people, but then you might as well just say you need 50 votes. Anyway. And while a Democratic Judiciary Committee staffer told me last month that they were leaving all options open, the path forward remains unclear. That has frustrated oversight groups, and understandably so. Supreme Court ethics reform was overdue well before the latest beat in the Alito scandal broke, but after hearing Alito on tape describing himself as a participant in a battle in which one side or the other is going to win, the prospect of him ruling on any case, let alone one that will decide whether Donald Trump has immunity from prosecution in Jack Smith's election subversion case, is even more outrageous. There is deep rot within the court, as Maggie Jo, I don't know what she says, Buchanan, or as they say sometimes in Virginia, southern and southwestern Virginia, Buchanan. Anyway, Maggie Jo, the managing director of the court accountability group Demand Justice, was the one who said there's deep rot within the court on Tuesday. Congress must do everything possible to shine a light on their actions, as well as to explain to the American people who the justices should act. What do you mean who the justices should act? Did I read that wrong? Congress must do everything possible to shine a light on their actions, as well as to explain to the American people, I don't know, I think that's supposed to be maybe how the justices should act, and it ended up a typo and didn't get caught because who is a word. Okay, got it. Even given the Republican opposition to common sense ethical standards, there is an important opportunity to make clear how and why this MAGA movement has infected the judiciary, as well as the stakes for our country if more partisans are installed and empowered in our courts. What's striking about all this, beyond the sentiments Alito and his wife expressed in the recordings, and we didn't get deep into those recordings, but those are extensive reads. But, manageable, but you've probably made those reads already and have figured out what they have said. But what's striking about this, beyond all of their sentiments, is the apparent comfort that Alito felt in openly discussing his ideology. They are the comments of a man who regards himself as untouchable, and until Democrats are able to take action, he is. Alito is becoming a loose cannon turned on the court itself, as Richard Blumenthal, a Democrat on the Judiciary Committee, by the way, put it. He mocks ethics. And there you go. Not he lacks ethics, he mocks ethics. And, it's a good point. Really, until the numbers change, and there's a willingness in the Senate to do what it takes to do something about it, then he gets to do what he wants, and we all have to sit around and watch. I guess that's a fair point. All right, let's see. I mentioned to you earlier Greg Sargent's take on this, and apparently he's not alone in the take on the Hunter Biden conviction, but I think we actually explained it reasonably well, and so therefore we can leave it where it was. Also in primary news, we didn't get to it, but in case you were wondering about the outcome because you don't live in South Carolina and don't care to look for South Carolina news, did Nancy Mace win her primary? The ultimate showboat, as it were. Although, actually, she's actually quite bad at it, but she's trying very hard. She's the try-hard showboat, if only it would catch on. And the answer is, yeah, it didn't get in her way. She won her primary. Now, there's another story. Always some interesting, nuanced layers to every political story if you look at it closely enough and from a local angle, or maybe not necessarily a local angle in this case, but a different angle. Nancy Mace has won her primary. I don't think anybody expected the other person to win the primary, but I guess what we didn't mention in yesterday's coverage of it was that Nancy Mace, well, we did mention that Nancy Mace joined the 7 other Freedom Caucus wackadoodles who teamed up to undo Kevin McCarthy's speakership earlier this year, or last year. And that was sort of unexpected, and we talked all about why it was unexpected and why we should have expected it, given what we now know about Nancy Mace. So what happened? Kevin McCarthy, apparently, taking a page from the Donald Trump playbook, says, I'll do a revenge thing. I will target Nancy Mace for kicking me out and, disrupting the Republican conference and turning it on its head, when we should have been standing as a unified source of opposition to Biden, because, of course, if we're trying to sell America on the idea that he's actually the worst dictator that's ever taken over the United States, then, we've got some work to do. But instead of doing that work, you threw me out of office. Fine. I now have nothing to do. I will take my revenge on Nancy Mace and the 7 who joined with Democrats shamefully to throw me out of office. So Nancy Mace has faced a primary challenge from a Kevin McCarthy-backed candidate who the Politico headline puts it, Nancy Mace outmaneuvers Kevin McCarthy's revenge operation. The South Carolina Republican defeated Catherine Templeton on Tuesday. I guess that's who was supposed to be the vehicle for Kevin McCarthy's revenge. But as it turns out, the other guy, the original I'm motivated by revenge Republican candidate, Donald Trump, backed, you guessed it, Nancy Mace in all of this. So in the battle of revenge tours, the Donald Trump revenge tour, to no one's surprise, turned out to have more heft behind it than the Kevin McCarthy revenge tour, which probably nobody even knew was happening. But if you point that out and say Kevin McCarthy is seeking revenge, oh yeah, okay, that makes a certain amount of sense, because he too is a petulant child. But he's not a famous petulant child the way Donald Trump is. So in the battle of petulant children, the bigger, more vocal, and better known petulant child prevailed, to no one's surprise. And I guess it should also be pointed out, there were actual people running in the seat. It wasn't necessarily just a proxy contest between the two national crybaby idiots. They were represented locally by smaller caliber crybaby idiots. Anyway, Kevin McCarthy's revenge tour is off to a bumpy start. And given that he probably only has 8 contests in which to be heard, and most of them, there's no chance in the world that he would ever upset the incumbent, I don't know how well it's going to go. South Carolina Representative Nancy Mace was one of 8 Republicans who voted to strip the former Speaker of the gavel, and the former Speaker's allies spent big to take her down. That was dumb, so great. They couldn't do it. As it happens, Mace decisively defeated Catherine Templeton, a former gubernatorial candidate whose allies plunged more than $5 million against the incumbent, according to ad tracker Ad Impact. Her victory could be a good sign for McCarthy's other detractors who have primary challenges in the coming weeks and months, including Matt Gaetz, who correctly predicted that Mace was about to roll her opposition. And indeed she did. Looks like the last updated information is that Mace garnered some 56.8% of the Republican primary vote to Catherine Templeton's 29.8%, but another 13.4% cast for one William Young. So let's see. Together, that's about 30, then another 13, so 43. So, well, I mean, you'd be able to figure out what that percentage was. Given that Nancy Mace had about 57, how much was left? And the answer is 43. So there you go. Crucially, Mace won the backing of Donald Trump. The former president wasn't always a Mace fan. And remember that Mace, we were reading that profile of her yesterday, that she came into office having worked for his 2016 campaign, but by 2020 was looking forward to her first term in office, entering into Congress only to find herself in the middle of the January 6th riot, but also looking to occupy space as an anti-Trump Republican. And then 4 years later, running for re-election as a Republican endorsed by Donald Trump. So you tell me how you're supposed to, read this map. Crucially, as we said, Mace won the backing of Donald Trump. The former president wasn't always a Mace fan. He backed her ultimately unsuccessful primary challenger in 2022 after Mace blamed him for the Capitol riot. But Mace also evolved since that election. I guess you could call it an evolution. The congresswoman who repeatedly broke with her party on abortion has swung away from and back to supporting Trump. She was known for throwing herself into the spotlight. At one point, during the rancorous speaker fight, she signaled how her vote might ostracize her from her party by wearing a scarlet A on her shirt, but really looked like Captain America rather than any sort of scarlet letter reference. Anyway, in recent months, she has stayed relatively quiet. South Carolina Republican Representative Ralph Norman described Mace as being more mellow in Congress this year. She's kind of low profile now, unless, of course, you're reading all the stories about her fighting with her staff about how many times they get her on television. A Mace victory adds to Trump's wins this cycle. And the former president congratulated Mace on social media soon after. He endorsed candidates who have mostly had a strong track record in this year's congressional primaries, with the exception of Mendham Borough Mayor Christine Serrano Glasner, who last week lost the New Jersey Senate primary. I think Mace intimidates a lot of guys because she's smart and she's aggressive, and some dudes just can't handle that. Oh, they're going to make it a feminism thing. All right. Representative Tim Burchett, Republican of Tennessee, said, but ultimately Burchett, who also voted against McCarthy, said Mace's primary challenger was rooted in the speakership vote. Absolutely, that's the only reason. Another of the McCarthy targets, Representative Bob Good, from right here in Virginia, faces a primary race next week, but unlike Mace, the House Freedom Caucus chair isn't benefiting from Trump's support. The former president is instead backing Good's opponent, State Senator John McGuire, as are a handful of members of Congress, by the way. Good, who initially supported Florida Governor Ron DeSantis in the presidential primary. I'll never forget that. I'll never let you get away. Oh, actually, I kind of probably will. But in this case, maybe that's what's motivating endorsing someone else. It hasn't been for any love of McCarthy, I'm sure. Trump is on both sides of that one. Well, anyway, Good, who initially supported DeSantis, has been outraised and outspent on the airwaves by McGuire. So we'll see how that one comes out, later in the week, I guess. Next week, actually. Representative Eli Crane of Arizona, who also voted to oust McCarthy and faces a primary later this summer. There's also two of McCarthy's other detractors, Representative Matt Rosendale of Montana and former Representative Ken Buck of Colorado, who weren't running for re-election, while two others, Burchett and Representative Andy Biggs of Arizona, do not have primary opponents. So really, it's kind of a mixed bag. Of 8 Republicans who voted to oust McCarthy. 2 weren't running, and 2 have no primary opponents. So only half of them actually drew primary opposition at all, and so far it doesn't look like it's had much effect, even when they do draw challengers. Okay, so Representative John Duarte, a McCarthy ally and fellow Republican from California, said these members need repercussions where it's relevant, whatever that's supposed to mean. Duarte helped support Templeton in this primary and didn't rule out helping other challengers in the future. It just isn't doing anything. I mean, I don't rule it out. It's just not working. We came here to have a majority and to stop socialism in America. In this kind of barrel of monkeys nonsense, I don't even understand, that disrupted the conference and disrupted our effectiveness is frustrating. I see. Duarte said on Tuesday, as drawn today, South Carolina's 1st District would have voted for Trump over now President Joe Biden by 9 percentage points in 2020, but it is also the only congressional district to award former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley delegates from her home state in the presidential primary. So I don't know what you're supposed to make of that. The answer is don't make anything of it. It doesn't matter, but it's an interesting, method by which to parse this whole thing. And remember, we were here for the nuance. All right. Let's see. Other information to make you aware of. Perhaps now is a good time to turn to this story that broke in the middle of yesterday's consideration of the political landscape. In Trump's orbit, some muse about mandatory military service, which is, of course, ironic for the draft dodger, Donald Trump. Though then again, since we're playing the nuance game, draft dodging during the Vietnam era, extraordinarily popular thing to do among liberal Democrats, for one thing, but something, and now he's a MAGA Republican wackadoodle, and, so whatever it's necessary in service to himself was driving all of that decision. But anyway, here we are with the idea that there ought to be mandatory military service. That's usually something that appeals to conservatives, and particularly ultra-right type conservatives who consider their brand of ultra-rightism to be super patriotism, even though in many cases those are people who themselves did not serve. Some yes, some no. And of course, remember that this is the mandatory universal conscription backed by small government libertarian types. Sure. Whatever. I was also just sort of adding to the mix, by the way. It's not discussed in this article, which we should read through. The weird possibilities that, given the mixed bag of people who will be supporting this, you're talking about mandatory universal conscription because small government, but P.S. also don't vaccinate any of them. Love to be stuck in a barracks with unvaccinated conscripts from MAGA land. So anyway, only 1% of the U.S. population serves in the armed forces under their current volunteer regime. P.S. We keep saying we can't actually pay for any more of them, but what if we, quadrupled that and then also said we won't pay them? Anyway, some of the former president's camp say it's time more young adults put some skin in the game. And by the way, Democrats along the line have occasionally said that too, with the idea in mind that it might make us less compliant when Republican presidents commit those troops to battle and start killing your kids. Maybe they would feel themselves more constrained if it weren't simply volunteers. Anyway, like we said, some nuance to this. Julianne Ventura and Julianne Andreoni putting this story together for the Washington Post. Dateline in Texarkana, by the way. Kira Rousseau remembers feeling trapped in her high school media center last fall when a phalanx of military personnel and faculty members shut the doors behind her and about 100 classmates before gathering everyone's phone. Sounds like you actually are trapped. Rousseau, 18, was a senior here at Liberty Halo. I don't know how you pronounce that. EYLAU. Elo. High School. The Liberty part I understand not only how to pronounce, but how ironic it is. Welcome to Liberty High School. You are now trapped in the media center. The military is shutting the doors behind you and confiscating your phone here at Liberty High School in order to get you to do what? Listen to the recruiting pitch of joining the military in order to defend liberty. You know, the stuff you just lost. How does it feel to have no liberty? I bet you don't like it very much. Well, maybe now you'll join the military, where you'll experience unprecedented levels of liberty, by the way, in the defense of liberty. The point is, someone else will enjoy that liberty, maybe even your family. Want to join? Well, all right. Anyway, they tricked us, Rousseau said. They said ASVAB, but they didn't tell us what ASVAB was. What is it? It's the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We were just beginning to read this story, which was presented as a story about the folks in Trump's orbit floating the idea of bringing back mandatory military service. But it feels like there's another story mashed in here as well, which I guess has to do with the recruitment efforts that the current all-volunteer military uses, and just how odd it gets. And I guess is this supposed to set the stage for the argument that we don't have enough people participating in the military and we have to resort to trickery in order to get them to do it? And wouldn't it be better somehow if everybody had to? Maybe not. I don't even know. I don't think I've ever really fully evaluated that question, because it just hasn't been presented in a serious manner in quite some time, and everybody was pretty happy with that. But anyway, this is kind of interesting. So she feels like they tricked people into coming in and taking, is this a battery of tests, vocational aptitude testing, at the end of which they tell you, you'd be really good at pressing buttons in the data center for the military, or you'd be very good at getting shot, or what, I don't know how you figure that stuff out. But, at any rate, interesting. I guess they had to trick them somehow into coming in there. And I don't know whether the trick was, you can leave your class and skip it if you come to the ASVAB. I don't know whether they say that, or ASVAB or anything. I don't know whether they give it some sort of acronym that they pronounce out loud this way. But at any rate, they probably said, yeah, you can skip class. And if that was, hey, my boring math class, I'll skip it and I'll come to this thing in the library media center. And then they'll take away my phone somehow for some reason and make me take some kind of a test. Well, that's the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery, a standardized test developed by the Defense Department decades ago to help the military funnel recruits into occupations that match their skills and intellect. And if Donald Trump's last defense secretary could have his way, which he won't because he's not the defense secretary now, and I'm sure would never be the defense secretary ever again because he didn't hand over control of the troops personally to Donald Trump. Well, anyway, if he had his way, which for some reason we're thinking about, all public high school students would be required to take it. And you don't have to study, and you don't have to do anything in particular. And it doesn't matter either. I suppose even if they gave you all the tests, would say, you'd be very good at pressing buttons in a drone feeding data center. Yeah, well, I'm not going to do that for the Defense Department. I'll do that for the private sector and get more money and be able to go home in the evenings and play video games where I pretend that I'm killing people in gruesome fashion rather than actually doing it for real and for less money. So, who could blame them? Anyway, Christopher Miller, who led the Pentagon during the chaotic closure of Trump's tenure in Washington and would never be trusted by Donald Trump ever again because he did about the closest thing to the right thing that the Trump administration ever did in its history, in denying the leveraging and use of the military to keep Donald Trump in power, blah, blah, blah. Christopher Miller has detailed his vision for the ASVAB to whoever would listen. And guess what? Guess who's listening? Ironically enough, right? I don't want Christopher Miller ever again near the military. He doesn't know what he's doing. He didn't sign over the use of the troops to me personally, yada, yada. Well, he's detailed his vision for the ASVAB and a range of other changes as part of Project 2025. So a little bit more nuance here. There's no chance in the world that Donald Trump wants this guy anywhere near military policy for him in the future. So who is writing military policy for his envisioned second term, if there even is a term of office anymore? And the answer is, of course, Christopher Miller. Because why not? Who else is going to do it? I don't know. I mean, anybody. It doesn't have to be an expert. In fact, it's better if it's not. And so I don't know. It's interesting. This is an argument for not taking Project 2025 as seriously, not in terms of how dangerous it would be if it was implemented. That you still have to take seriously. But the effort to assemble a real policy platform, is it serious? I don't know. I mean, on the one hand, you might say, well, he actually knows a little something about what he was doing when he was defense secretary. He wasn't going to hand the military over to Donald Trump, so maybe he is an adult in the room. On the other hand, he's someone who agreed to serve as Donald Trump's defense secretary, so how serious is he really? Anyway. Right. So you'll recall, of course, what Project 2025 is. It's the Conservative Heritage Foundation's aspirational government-wide game plan should the presumptive Republican nominee and convicted felon return to the White House. Though Trump has not publicly endorsed its policy proposals, Miller is among a cluster of influential former administration officials and GOP lawmakers who have mused aloud about national service mandates and other measures to remedy what they see as a crisis facing the all-volunteer military. Trump has been complimentary, believe it or not, of Miller's performance during his administration, but he's also been highly critical of it, but we'll leave that out for some reason, and suggested that if there is a second term, he might reprise his role as defense secretary. Who suggested that? Trump did? I don't know about that. And though are we just going to erase the whole, I can't stand it, he wouldn't give me the troops? I guess so. And though the former president has not weighed in on this heritage strategy document, he did embrace many of the organization's proposals at the outset of his first term. He's not going to oppose it largely because he has no other ideas. So if he finds himself somehow in the presidency, whether having been elected or otherwise seizing power, I'm sure he'll say, I don't know, if you have a plan, I'll take it. Sure. In an interview, Miller said a national service requirement should be strongly considered. He described the concept as a common rite of passage that would create a sense of shared sacrifice among America's youth. It reinforces the bonds of civility, teaching people to kill people. You know how it is. Why wouldn't we give that a try? Good question. I mean, one answer I would give you, as I suggested at the outset, is remember, you're talking about national service, but also, has anybody given any consideration to how many vaccines you end up having to take as a conscript into the armed forces, voluntarily or otherwise? Conscript, volunteer, you get a battery of vaccines, and it'd be real interesting to see what anti-vax America has to say about being forced into the military full of vaccines, whether they just ignore it and say, I don't know, for some reason it's contradictory, I know, but I'm just going to take the vaccines, or whether they hold out against it. And as some social media discussion of this idea yesterday had it, it would be a weird result to teach all the lefties who would otherwise be out protesting and might later be out protesting against the Trump administration or its successors or its aftermath or what have you. And they all know how to field strip a M16 as well. And maybe it's a little bit weird now that we've taught them to fight and kill. And but don't worry about it, because MAGA America will be out there too, except they all allowed themselves to be conscripted into the military unvaccinated, and the Trump military allowed them to stay unvaccinated, and now they all have hepatitis. So, that could be the outcome from all of this too. Under his plan, back to Miller, he said the ASVAB would be used to identify potential military weaknesses and help plug knowledge gaps as U.S. defense leaders size up competitors like China and devise plans for possible conflicts with a range of foreign adversaries, or adversaries if you prefer that pronunciation, but that's the way the foreigners say it, so we don't like that. It's an interesting idea. We'll assess our gaps in our military and then use the ASVAB to identify students who might help us plug that gap. Of course, most of the gaps that we have trouble plugging are ones that students say, this is the reason I want to A, go on to higher education, and B, work in the private sector. I don't want to, be conscripted into the military to do this valuable thing for next to no pay. It's an interesting thing. Of course, in order to fight socialism and enable the freedom of the great capitalist marketplace, we will use the power of the state to force you to work for next to nothing and give over all of your talents for conscripts' pay to the federal government. For freedom. Can't make sense of it. We just want to do it. All right. If we're going to prepare for a great power competition, Miller said, it's helpful to have a baseline understanding of the pool of potential military service members and their specific aptitudes prior, so that we can steal that ability and labor from them at slave wages. His contribution to Project 2025 also advocates granting military recruiters greater access to secondary schools, and he's proposed halting use of the Defense Department's electronic medical records platform, which he says leads to unnecessary delays and unwarranted rejections for some people with disabilities or other conditions who otherwise want to serve. I don't think it's the fact that it's electronic, because I was having difficulty. How do electronic medical records lead to unnecessary delays? I thought the idea there was to speed things up. But I guess what he's talking about is, well, if you're in a wheelchair, presumably the Defense Department says, yeah, as a military recruit, you're a no. And, understandably so, I guess, in the old school version of the military, but I guess in the new reality where drone pilots could just as easily be people who have mobility issues, and they'd be just as successful as drone pilots or other roles in the military. I suppose that's entirely possible. And it might even be considered somewhat progressive to make room for them, except that I don't know how many of them are really dying to serve in the military. But if you are, I guess we could help make room for you. Even without electing Donald Trump, we could probably make it work. On Tuesday, after publication of this report, Trump wrote on social media that the idea he would call for mandatory military service was ridiculous. It is a little bit ridiculous, given that he himself avoided military service when it was compulsory, and attacked the Washington Post for what he said was a failed attempt to damage me with the voters, capital V. In fact, he said, I never even thought of that idea. But of course, if it proved popular, I'll change my story about it. Trump's own relationship with the military is complicated. As a teenager, he attended a military academy, but later sought deferments to avoid service during the Vietnam War. He didn't know he had, bone spurs until it was time to actually pay the piper and do the military service he had ostensibly been training for. As president, he embraced the role of commander-in-chief, but routinely clashed with the Pentagon as its leaders balked at many of his impulses, including Miller, by the way, and recoiled when claims surfaced that he'd disparaged those killed in combat. Trump's campaign declined to address whether the former president supports mandatory military service. We'll tell you in 2 weeks. And sought to tamp down speculation about his agenda. In a statement, top advisors cautioned that unless announced by the former president or an authorized member of his re-election team, no conjecture about future staffing or policy should be deemed official. And I guess that's actually, somewhat sensible. Collectively, the military services fell short of the Pentagon's recruiting goal by about 41,000 last year. Officials told lawmakers in December only the Marines and the Space Force met their objectives, and that may have been because they only needed like 6 people in the Space Force. In explaining its shortfall, the Army, the largest of the services, points to internal data indicating that most of America's youths, 71%, in fact, do not qualify for military service for reasons that include obesity, that is kind of bad, drug use, that's also bad, and aptitude, which, quite honestly, typically most people think the aptitude threshold for getting into the Army in any position, if you'll take any job, not that difficult to overcome. But, that's sort of bad news. Anyway, only 1% of the U.S. population serves in the armed forces, Army data shows. The United States halted conscription in 1973. 2 years before the Vietnam War ended, and since then, the idea of mandatory military service has remained politically unpopular. But some in the GOP appear willing to make a case for change. Doesn't that make them progressive? They're making a case for change. Senator J.D. Vance, of course, of Ohio, a potential Trump running mate, said in an interview that he sees a clear need for measures to boost participation. Interestingly, he does not want to let the free market do the work here. I like the idea of national service, and I'm not talking about in wartime, he said, which I doubly love it, calling for more Americans to put some skin in the game, or really rather to have that skin taken from them by force of arms and government power because of how libertarian and freedom-loving he is. Senator Lindsey Graham, the one-time Trump confidant who has recently clashed with the former president. He's back to clashing with him. He clashed with him. He ran against him. He said he was an idiot. He said we deserved it if we elected him. Then he became a Trump bootlicker, and now he's clashing with him again. Suggested that military recruiters needed more leeway to work in the country's public schools, and said, I will take no option off the table when it comes to addressing the shortfalls, including compulsory service. But curiously, the ultra-capitalists are not suggesting higher pay or corporate-style recruitment for the best and brightest among America's high school graduates or college graduates, but instead looking for ways to either limit everybody's options such that the armed forces is an attractive alternative, or just plain saying, to hell with it, I don't care what you want to do. You have to do this, and you have to do this for this rate of pay in order for us to have freedom and capitalism and fight socialisms. But you will get free health care. So you tell me what's going on. Rob Hood, a former official in the Trump Defense Department. Rob Hood, that's his real name. Not Robin, necessarily, but of course that was always a nickname for Robert, but this one just goes by Rob. And just as well as he's probably not robbing from the rich at any point, let alone giving to the poor. Rob Hood, a former official in the Trump Defense Department and in the George W. Bush White House, said he thinks 18 to 20-year-olds would benefit from gaining a better appreciation for how great this country is. Better greatness through socialism is clearly the plan here. Who gave them their social security numbers, which is socialisms? The United States government, Hood said. There can be takers and there can be the givers. And once we're all a bunch of takers and there are no givers, this country will collapse. And his solution, take from everybody. I really don't understand that, but, the point here is that the military gets a pass for everything because the military equals, I don't know, America, greatness, freedom, democracy, whatever. But look no further than just using the words, I guess. Well, the Pentagon declined to comment, by the way, as is right in all of this. To address the military's recruiting shortfall, officials said earlier this year that the Defense Department would lean into marketing that encourages young adults to seize a sense of purpose by joining up and emphasizes the tangible advantages of doing so, including healthcare, socialism, and retirement benefits, socialism. Just, wanted to point that out. Mackenzie Eaglin, a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute who hates socialism, characterized the Pentagon's posture as treading water. Military leaders, she said, are throwing everything at the wall in the hope that good ideas will stick. Okay. While it's evident that more must be done, she said, I still don't see that as enough to make the case for Congress to direct mandatory service onto America's youth. What could change lawmakers' calculus? Pressure from the White House, Eaglin said. Yet often in polarized Washington, consensus is hit or miss. In 2023, for instance, Congress agreed to provide military recruiters with greater access to high schools and college campuses, a draft our daughters provision that would require all 18-year-old women to register with the Selective Service has been mired in debate for years. Conservatives don't know how to approach that one. Yes, on the one hand, military, and so therefore we support it. On the other hand, traditional gender roles. No, please, we can't do it. Except, of course, unless we're electing women veterans to Congress as Republicans, in which case it's okay somehow. The specter of a national service requirement, said Senator John Hickenlooper, a Democrat of Colorado, strikes me as un-American. I wouldn't say that, but, it strikes me as unpopular anyway. He called such Republican proposals strange before adding, there are an awful lot of things they're doing that seem strange to me. Mandating the ASVAB at public high schools could represent a middle ground. Yeah, I agree. Could be. You could consider that middle ground. Well, you could take the exam. You don't have to go into the military. They could start recruiting you based on it. But then again, it should be at least voluntary to take the thing. Anyway, although neither state nor federal law requires that students take the exam, some schools already make students sit for the assessment. The U.S. Military Entrance Processing Command, in response to a Freedom of Information Act request about a decade ago, that's how long it took, disclosed that more than 900 schools across the nation reported mandating the test. Defense Department officials declined to request for current figures. Liberty Alau, I don't know how you pronounce that. I still don't. That's the school that we were talking about at the beginning in Texarkana, was among the schools identified in that list as not requiring the ASVAB, and yet this happened. In a brief interview, the school's assistant principal, Latasha Harris, confirmed that all seniors at the school are asked to take the test. Asked. Well, okay. All of them can take it on one day, she said. Harris did not respond when contacted with additional questions, nor did other school administrators. When Rousseau returned home from school after taking the ASVAB, she told her mother, Laura Rousseau, that the school had forced her to take the military test. I don't want to fight in a war, she said, and that may not be the upshot of taking the test. Sometimes kids come away with the impression that they were forced. Other times they come away with they're correct in coming away with that impression, even though the school officials do everything they can to say, well, you could have opted not to take it. It's just that we required that all non-test takers, anybody who opted out of it, had to bathe in acid during the time that their peers were taking the test. And, what can I tell you? She freely chose to take the test. Anyway, Laura Rousseau said she just wants her daughter to decide her future and does not want the military to interfere. I feel like they're trying to make it easier just to draft the kids, she added. More than 1,000 miles away in southwest Pennsylvania, a 15-year-old student in Connellsville area senior high school wore an oversized military jacket, its sleeves drooping past his hands, and pants with legs so long they dragged on the floor. Why is this happening? All sophomores here are required to take the military aptitude test, said Joseph P. Walsh, a retired Army officer and the school's Junior Reserve Officers Training Corps instructor. He said he uses the results to advise students to consider specific military jobs. Walsh called the program an opportunity for those who may not be able to afford advanced education or to qualify for well-paying employment after high school. He said the junior ROTC awarded 3 Connellsville students more than $1 million in scholarships last year. Really? 3 of them got $1 million? Which he has used as a selling point to attract others. That seems excessive. More than $1 million in scholarships for 3 students. Well, if you say so, I don't believe you. But okay. Anyway, I get a lot of kids that come from nothing, Walsh said, so job security is important. At least one teacher at Connellsville High criticized the military presence. David Hartz, who has taught at the school for nearly 30 years, said mandating military testing feels big brothery and deceives students into believing they have less of a choice about their futures. Hartz said he's not anti-military, but believes students should be able to choose whether they take the test. I mean, that seems fair enough. A RAND study published in 2017 found that low-income areas are disproportionately targeted by military recruiters. A separate RAND report published in April suggests that incidents of misconduct by recruiters have shaped the impressions of some parents and school administrators who fear they might endanger students or take advantage of those too young to understand the commitment of enlistment. A national service requirement, Miller contends, would afford young people from across the country the opportunity to learn about and rely on one another. He and other advocates of the political right say they believe the United States is losing its civil cohesion. I wonder how that could be happening, and view this as a solution. We don't have a mechanism now in our society, Miller said, that leavens everyone and provides a common focus and a common vision. That's true. Of course, whenever you suggest having such a thing, unless it's military in nature, it is denounced as socialism by the very people who now seek to impose it on a mandatory basis, but through the military, which they admire and love, and for some reason think would come to their aid in seizing power, should it come to that. So, a lot of interesting reaction to that story. That's the end of the story. We actually made it to the end on this one. And a lot of people pointing out, in addition to my own observations, like, yes, you're now going to do this. And, well, I mean, Trump isn't endorsing it. And that's probably wise of him, because I'm thinking, again, I mean, I don't know if they're ever going to put 2 and 2 together, but standing in front of a MAGA rally crowd and saying, we're going to make military service mandatory and you're all going to get injected upside down and sideways and you're all definitely getting the COVID-19 vaccine. Remember that he tried that with his rally crowds. I am the one who invented the COVID vaccine and I saved the world. Well, that netted you a lot of booze, not BOOZE, and you don't even drink, supposedly. That would have been a good thing. But anyway, the crowd was booing you, and he turned around. He did a 180 on the vaccines at his own rallies, which is amazing because that was something he was there to claim credit for. But the crowd wouldn't allow it. So if they can ever put 2 and 2 together and say, yeah, you're all getting the COVID-19 vaccine involuntarily. In fact, you're getting all the vaccines involuntarily. If we go through with this plan, maybe they'll be torn. Military, yes, I love it. I'm not in it, but I love it. But at the same time, vaccination. Boo, I hate that. I was willing to boo Trump at his own rally over vaccines. If I can put these 2 things together, will it end up that people are booing Trump at his rallies if he endorses this idea? Maybe he sees it coming. Maybe he doesn't. I don't know. But probably best for him politically if he not endorse this thing. And also others pointing out maybe this is the way that you put together the Stephen Miller endorsed army that you need, not for genuine military missions, but for domestic deportation programs. Where are you going to get the people that go door to door in every city in America and round up the 11 to 15 million people that they are targeting for deportation in their immigration plans? whether they're immigrants or not. It doesn't really matter, just so long as they're brownish and we can convince people that they came from Mexico just by looking at them. Where would you get those forces? Where would you get the people that you would put in the street in riot gear to fight against anybody who was standing up for, civil rights or anything else in this country? Well, if we conscripted them into service, we would have them. I don't know what kind of soldiers they're going to make, but we could do it that way. That was another bit of speculation, definitely worth considering. Of course, that's probably a more immediate concern than the ideas we were pointing out along the way in this article. For thinking people, and I guess there aren't many of them at their MAGA rallies, just the oddity of there's a certain brand of socialism that we as conservative, Republican, capitalist, anti-socialist, fascist neo-Nazis just can't get enough of. And, that's a weird thing. And a weird internal contradiction. I told you, there's nuance everywhere. None of it makes any sense. All right, well, we'll see whether Justice Putnam can make any sense of things as he takes over the airwaves for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy next right here on Netroots Radio. And here's what we got on tap for you. Cannon's latest efforts, that's Eileen Cannon's, to aid Trump and avoid any Mar-a-Lago Espionage Act trial this year, accidentally expose her own errors. We'll have to catch up with that story. Elsewhere, a federal appeals court upheld the California law banning gun shows at county fairs. Sounds like a pretty good safety idea. But of course, they'll oppose it on freedom grounds, but also freedom and socialism. We love it all.
RetortsRadio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
All right, action here in Virginia as the NAACP sued a county school board over its reinstatement of Confederate military names to 2 schools. And the lead singer of the Four Tops has sued a Detroit area hospital for restraining him and ordering a psychological exam after refusing to believe that he was one of the Four Tops. You're crazy. Stay tuned.